and welcome to Visions. I'm Mirella Rich. Today our guests are Kurt Esser and Irving Solwick from the Justice Project. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mirella.
Now, can you tell us what makes you so passionate about justice and human rights?
Well, I'm a lawyer. Irving is a social researcher, but we both share a deep interest in the notion that we need to have some mechanism to preserve our human rights. Australia has had a proud tradition of being at the forefront of the protection of human rights, and we've seen over the last couple of years that reputation has been eroded. We've seen mandatory detention being introduced. We've seen wholesale changes to our rights in the ASIO legislation, the commonly called anti-terrorism legislation. Dr. Narif is a very current issue at the moment. And while we think that it's important, for example, to have proper security and to have proper laws that protect people's security, and that there is a great need nowadays for people to have resort to protection from terrorism, we think that the balance is totally wrong. We think that there's a real case for saying that the balance has been skewed much too much in favour of the government, and the government has trampled on human rights. And we think that now is really the time for people who are like-minded to come and say so and to express their views. And they have, haven't they?
Yes, of course. If you take an historical view, there's always a conflict between... There has been always a conflict between the rights of the individual and the rights and the power of the state. The state tends to be coercive, and people have to assert, in a democracy in particular, that they do have rights which need to be protected. I mean, you go back in English history to the Magna Carta, which was a statement of rights. And if you go back not so far to the 19th century, English people were active in an attempt to have representation in Parliament, because for a long time they didn't. And there were a group of people called the Chartists who developed a Charter of Rights. And some of them became convicts because they were agitating around that charter, and they were sent to Australia. So Australia's got links with that British tradition. And the miners in Eureka, in Ballarat, were influenced by Chartist views. And they said, we shouldn't be taxed if we're not represented in Parliament. So they said no taxation without representation. And in fact, the leader of the miners, Peter Lalor, became later a Member of Parliament, and many of their demands were recognised and embodied in legislation. So there's a proud history, as Kurt said, of people asserting their rights to protection, their rights to organise as trade unionists. And there's a natural tendency for the state, almost irrespective of which party is in power, to want to control things. And we just are not mavericks. We just want to make sure that people have people's rights are recognised.
In the lead up to the election, for example, we think at the Justice Project, Irving and I are both founding members of the Justice Project, we think there's a real opportunity to blow a trumpet about human rights and to really wave the flag and say, well, we live in a democracy still. We've got an opportunity to question our politicians about where they stand on human rights. We think that there's a great need to preserve human rights. People will all agree that the right of association is something that's fine. There should be a right of free expression. People all agree about these basic notions. But the really interesting pointed question is politically, but what are you going to do to protect them? What are you going to do to protect them? And that's what the Justice Project is concerned about. We're constantly trying to orchestrate public campaigns so that we can influence people about the need to protect human rights.
We believe it's important for the least powerful in society to be protected. For instance, refugees have come to this country from appalling conditions overseas, frightened for their lives, properly frightened for their lives. And they've been, in many cases, incarcerated in camps and held there for years. They have no knowledge of English, no knowledge of the law, no links into the power groups in the society, very little opportunity to even represent themselves. Now, they're human beings and they should have the rights of human beings. And we believe that they're emblematic of people who aren't with power, but there's no reason why their rights shouldn't be as sacred to us as the rights of people who do have power.
Absolutely, everyone's equal, so everyone deserves just as much.
The other important point, which is sometimes skimmed over by the government and apologists for government policy, is that these people who have come to Australia for asylum have actually done nothing wrong. You'll hear John Howard going on that we have a right to say who comes into this country and on what terms, etc. Mr. Howard is totally and utterly wrong about that. We don't have that right because we have signed the Refugee Convention and we've undertaken, by the terms of the Refugee Convention, for that to control our policies, not Mr. Howard and not his government. If Mr. Howard believes in the rule of law says these people have done absolutely nothing wrong by coming to Australia to apply for refugee status. So we need to correct that impression. The Justice Project has as one of its main roles to disseminate the truth, the correct legal information, and for us not blindly to accept what either party might say about the protection of human rights.
How did the Justice Project actually get started?
Well, it started by a group of friends. Julian Burnside QC, myself, Malcolm Fraser, Irving Solwick, and a group of other people, my partner Sally Webster, a man who's prominent in Melbourne's Greek community, John Zapras. We all decided we would get together and see what we could do to publicise the need in 2004 to bring it to the public's attention that both parties weren't going to want to talk about the protection of human rights, or specifically back then about refugees' rights. So we struggled very hard to ensure that we got a questionnaire out. We questioned people about their positions on human rights, and particularly with respect to refugee law reform. And we publicised those results. Irving helped us do a questionnaire, and we publicised the results, and we wanted to make it very clear to people that they faced a choice at the election about choosing a politician who stood for the protection of human rights and stood for the rights of refugees.
Okay, we're about to go to a break now. You're watching Visions. We'll see you very shortly.